Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to our panel discussion on protecting your justice data. My name is Oluwatobiloba, and I'm a project manager on the Digital Human Rights Lab project at Future Challenges, a Berlin-based NGO, and I'll be introducing the Digital Human Rights Lab shortly. With me today are three lead panelists who will give us useful insights on data integrity and security within the East African context. Before we start our discussion today, I would like to share some general rules to guide in this interactive session. First, we'd like you to be as participatory as possible, and we'd like you to exchange throughout the session. You can ask a question at any time during the session in the chat box. However, we would appreciate you to ask your question directly by raising your hand, which is, you see the option below, one of the options below. And also, once you do that, we'll prompt you to speak. Also, if you want to ask a question, you can also state the panelist is directed to, and do that in the chat function if you prefer to do it that way. The final thing is we'll request that you keep your microphones muted throughout the session, except when prompted to speak. Okay, let's commence. When thinking of digitization, the initial focus that comes to our mind is typically on the enormous benefits of improved technology and the unprecedented value of data. However, on the flip side, civil society, private organizations, activists, citizens across the globe are more than ever before exposed to state surveillance. There's a lot of data loss, hacking, and this is the reality of people every day while working with data and on the internet. Against this backdrop, we'll address data integrity within the context of ethical use of data, as well as adequate respect and acquisition of consent. On the other hand, data security will be discussed within the framework of protecting data from unauthorized access and breaches. And at the end of the panel, the goal of this panel is that you have a better understanding of data security and integrity. You also have a better understanding of the risk that come with using the internet and the risks you're going to be continuously exposed to while putting out your data on the internet or while going around your daily activities. And also we'll shed light on the impact of data misuse and the opportunities and the tools of effective data protection. Before we proceed to the discussion itself, we would like to know who is in the room. And for that, there will be a poll question there's a poll question that just came on the screen now. I would like you to tell us about your profession. There are 5 categories. Please select the one that best describes your profession. Knowing who is in the room will help us in the course of the discussion, and it will help us know who we're speaking with. So we'll give you some seconds to fill in the poll. Okay, interesting. It seems like we have a lot of researchers, people from civil society are leading, people from IGOs and the government, no technical personnel or developer yet. Well, it seems to be interesting. Okay, so as we're filling in the poll, I will proceed to introduce our panelists. But before I do that, I will talk about the Digital Human Rights Lab. One of the projects and organizations that's collaborating to deliver the session. The Digital Human Rights Lab is a project currently running in Uganda that is working to strengthen human rights work within the region using innovative and tailor-made digital approaches. We also use a lot of continuous collaboration And while we do this while fostering a digital mindset among the Ugandan actors we work with. The Digital Human Rights Lab is an inclusive and participatory space where stakeholders from the civil society come together and corporately engage in topics at the intersection of human rights and digital platforms. To achieve the objectives of the lab uses 3 approaches. The first one is innovation, the second one is capacity building, and the third one is building of networks. Here, we bring together relevant human rights actors in Uganda and connect them and also support them to create what we call communities of practice. Currently, we have 5 communities of practice, one on digital inclusion, the second on cyber legislation, one on ICT for advocacy, another one on rural innovation, and the 5th one on digital security. 2 of our panelists today are members of the Digital Human Rights Lab, and they'll be sharing respective and relevant experiences from the Ugandan and East African context. We'll share further details on how you can connect with us at the end of the session. Okay, thank you for filling in the poll. It's good to know that we have a lot of people from the civil society community here and more people from more researchers. I also see that about 22% filled in that the other option. So it would be nice if you can maybe drop maybe a new category for us in the chat function, so we'll know who you are, and also we're able to channel our discussion to fit your needs and also that category. Thank you. We'll look forward to seeing more about that. Okay, at this point, I'll go ahead to introduce our panelists. And the first panelist we have is Gole Andrew. He is a digital security and ICT consultant in Uganda. He is also the co-founder of Encrypt Uganda. Encrypt Uganda is a digital rights organization with the goal to provide protection measures to digital threats. He's also the founder and director of DIGSEC. It's an initiative that works to improve the capacity of grassroots human rights defenders to overcome digital security issues. Gole Andrew's work has supported diverse grassroots organizations in Uganda and East Africa. And today he'll be talking basically from the perspective of data security and digital security. And that's what his work is centered on. You're welcome, Gole Andrew. Thank you for joining us. Okay, the second panelist we have today is Aidan Eyakuze. Aidan is an economist and the executive director of Twaweza in East Africa. This is an organization that works in 3 East African countries, and the focus is to enable children to learn, citizens to exercise their rights, and also to promote open and responsive government across the region. Aidan has 15 years of experience working on national scenario building projects in East Africa. He's also done a lot of work in South Africa, West Africa, in particular Nigeria. Notably, Aidan is a member of the steering committee of the Open Government Partnership, and is on the board of the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. He's also one of the prestigious Archbishop Desmond Tutu Leadership Fellows. Today, Aidan will be talking to us a lot about data misuse and misinterpretation. Thank you, Aidan, for joining us today. You're welcome. And our third panelist today is Natalie Dickman. She is a social entrepreneur with 8 years experience working in the justice and human rights sector as both an innovator and a researcher. As an innovator, she is a co-founder of SEMA, and she's also the CEO of the organization. SEMA is an accountability initiative in Uganda that leverages on new technologies to collect citizens' feedback data across the country. Data collected by SEMA has been used by a number of notable public ministries and institutions in Uganda. Apart from SEMA, Nathalie has been instrumental in setting up other initiatives like the Global Justice Accelerator at the Hague Institute of Innovation of Law, and the Amsterdam Law Orb at the University of Amsterdam. Thank you for joining us, Nathalie. And I think at this point, I'll hand over to Nathalie, who has another poll. We have another poll, and Nathalie will lead us through the poll, which will lay a good foundation for our conversations to follow. Over to you, Nathalie.
Thank you, Toby, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be joining you and to see some familiar names. So yeah, we have a few poll questions throughout the session to make it a little bit more interactive. And because this session is about data protection in the justice sector, we were curious to hear from you how you would assess your own knowledge level with regards to data security, because maybe some of you have joined because, yeah, you want to learn more about it. Maybe others are already specialists and they want to connect to other experts. Maybe you're trying to acquaint yourself a bit more, so we're curious to hear where you are and why you're here. Okay, most of us are learning and acquainting ourselves, but want to learn more. That's good. It means we don't have experts, which is a great thing. It means everyone will hopefully learn something in this session. And yeah, also many of us already have some knowledge, which is good. I would also put myself into that category. I'm definitely not an expert on security, but I have had some experiences with data misuse, which we're going to talk about next, I think. So thank you so much. Most of us are learning and acquainting ourselves with the topic. Toby, shall we go back to the panel or start with the panel at this stage?
Yes, please. Thanks for leading the poll. And I will start the panel discussion with you, Nathalie. So SEMA, as we know and as I've checked, I went through the details on your website. You've worked with a large amount of data with the aim of improving the effectiveness of public services in Uganda, and you've done a lot within the sector. So drawing from your experiences in Uganda and East Africa, what type of data generated by non-state actors are susceptible to mismanagement by public authorities?
Thanks, Toby. Yes, I'm not going to really go into what SEMA is all about, but basically you already introduced me. So SEMA is presenting data reports to different public offices. And I think the key difference with many other organizations that are doing data collections and research organizations is that we try to present the data to those who are delivering the services directly. So we have not done a ton of policy reports, even though we hope that our data is also used in policies, but we are actually presenting it to police officers, to health workers, to judges who are working at magistrate courts. So those are, let's say, our core audience for our data reports. And every month we give these reports very regularly. So it's not just one report a year, once every 3 years. No, we actually bring out monthly reports to each of these individual local justice sector providers. And in doing that, we've seen quite a number of different reactions on how they are presenting our data. And obviously in the justice sector, there's a lot of insecurities and sensitivities about how this data is being received, especially when it comes to topics like corruption. So it's always been like a very big challenge for us to see how do you present a report that shows a high corruption rate to a station. And in some cases, these numbers are fairly ignored actually by government entities. But the most interesting experiences we've had were more at the national level, because, for instance, I have been working in Uganda over the last 4 years in different capacities, also as a consultant, and I've been invited to the Justice, Law and Order sector annual reviews every year, and that's a sector-wide review of the performance of the sector, and it has all the donors, and it has, you know, a lot of NGOs that also take part in it, and they always bring out this big report called the JLOS Performance Report of that year. And this year, on one of the first pages on how they've been performing, they've been referring to our data, to SEMA's data, which we never really sent to them in detail. And they referred to the data showing that police services are doing much better, or that, you know, courts are improving, or that the justice sector is improving. And I was quite shocked by this, because on the one hand, yeah, we're happy to be mentioned, but on the other hand, the reference to our reports was basically wrong. It looked as if the whole sector is improving massively, and that's not what we always see, right? Many of these reports actually show that these stations are still quite corrupt, and that there's a lot of issues at the service level. So I think the point that I'm trying to bring across is that even as an NGO or an organization, or bringing out data in the justice sector is one thing, but the moment that the government uses that data and picks out the things they want to pick out and present it in a different way, it starts to change the reality for people. And it's very easy to manipulate data in public media. This is how fake news spreads. And the consequence is that people really do not know anymore what the truth is. And obviously, when something like that is published in a government report, the donors, so the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs and, you know, different big partners, Danida, SIDA, who are funding these governments, are seeing these results, and it may seem as if they're doing a great job in some cases, and I think that's shocking. Obviously, it's their responsibility to then critically look at the sources of these data. But yeah, that's, I think, one of the big issues that I have experienced and seen in Uganda, and I think is a big risk for us to keep in mind. And I'd also be curious whether more people in this session have experienced similar things. So hopefully we'll learn more about that from the participants.
Thank you, Nathalie. And you raised a very valid point on selecting the information that suits an organization or an image. And this is something that we see now. It's more rampant, especially from state actors. So this will lead to my next question, and that's to you, Aidan. I know your work has brought together diverse CSOs in Africa and beyond to demand accountability from governments. So what international collaborations and frameworks are in existence that can help identify and mitigate the challenge of data mismanagement?
Thank you so much, Toby. Maybe just before I get into those partnerships or international organizations, I wanted to just make a couple of points. One is it's good for us to understand what would motivate or tempt or push, incentivize governments to misuse the data in the way that Nathalie has just mentioned with her SEMA data. And I think this is the important thing here to remember, is that this data, when it is politically inconvenient, is ripe, fair game for manipulation or for misuse. So I think we need to understand, let's be conscious of the fact that that some of the data that we will produce or is produced shows the government up in a less than flattering light. And so therefore they're going to respond appropriately to that. But I think the second point I want to make is that even if that is the case, for example, your example there's Nathalie with SEMA, I think what is important is to have the space for a discussion about the interpretation and the context of the data. The data doesn't fall out from the sky. It doesn't pop out from a vacuum. It is generated from a context, and it sheds light on a particular set of experiences that people are having. And I think having the space to have that conversation is vitally important. And us as Twaweza try to create that space in East Africa. By both generating especially data from citizens' experience of public service delivery by various governments and other elements of their knowledge and attitudes towards whether environment or refugees or even the politics and the politicians who are leading them, so that we can have a conversation with data that is enriched by citizens' viewpoints. So I hope we'll get into this a little bit more, because I think that is fertile ground right there for discussion as to how one stops the abuse, misuse, of data, whether it's about justice, whether it's about agriculture, whether it's about health, whether it's about education. It's good to have that space, to have that dialogue as to what the data is showing, and hopefully round out the picture. So I am lucky enough to be involved with two global partnerships which have data as a major component of the work that we do. So one is the Open Government Partnership, as you've mentioned, and really the three objectives of the Open Government Partnerships are to promote transparency, and data transparency is absolutely central to what we try to do, so that people can see what government is doing, what government is holding, also about what government is holding about us in terms of citizens and the data they have about us and what they're doing with it, and also the decisions they're making about that data, who has access to that data, what they're doing with it, and how is it affecting their policies, budgeting, etc. The second one, of course, is inclusion. What do I mean here? By including citizens, civil society organizations especially, is the sort of the big bucket in which we put citizens and their inclusion into the decision making, but certainly having citizens and have a seat at the table when one is deciding, reviewing, monitoring, allocating resources, a seat at the table with government to make those decisions. So that inclusion is important. And of course, the third one is accountability. And yet again, data about accountability is vital here. Let me give you an example. In Tanzania, in East Africa, we borrowed a methodology from India to see whether the massive investments in education are actually resulting in kids learning. And over a period of 7-8 years, we found that the learning outcomes were far below what was expected, far below sort of the return on investment that society was making to educate children. And this, of course, it was politically inconvenient data across all the countries in which we were working. But some countries embraced this. We had to have arguments as to the veracity and the credibility of this data, but it has begun to change the approach and the focus of governments in terms of focusing now on kids actually learning the basics, what they call the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. In our region. The second one, and then I'll stop here because we can get into the discussion as to what exactly we do, is a global partnership for sustainable development data. And this one has really two main objectives. One is to make sure that data is actually used to achieve the SDGs by 2030. And the second one is to build a partnership around civil society, government, business, multilateral organizations, to make sure we can monitor the trajectories of the various SDGs towards 2030. Again, transparency is very important in there. Again, the interoperability, data that can be used many times, is machine readable, it's open, people can look at it, interpret what it means, is very important to drive that agenda forward. And on my pet interest is in what we call citizen-generated data. Because, sometimes we can talk, and it's the work that SEMA is doing and others. Sometimes we all focus too much on the officially produced statistics, and sometimes that can be misleading, it can be wrong, it can have very many gaps, but it will carry a huge weight in the decisions that are being made about the lives that people are leading. So citizen-generated data, surveys, even data that is passively produced, such as when we use mobile phones, when we make payments, when we transact, all of these kind of things can be very vital in terms of showing the impact, the effects, and how people are actually experiencing various public services and how they're interacting with one another. This is an important set of data for us to be able to use to round out the picture of how people experience. So let me stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Aidan. You raised a lot of interesting points. Like lately you talked about the passive production of data where people are not aware, using mobile phones, sending like very innocent text messages. You also talked about the need for a dialogue. And those are two interesting points we're going to touch on later as we proceed. But before I move on to Gole Andrew, I'd like everyone to know that after the next speaker, we're going to have a short question and answer session. So please start to prepare your questions. You can raise your hand if you want to speak. And if you rather not do that, you can already put your questions in the chat box and we'll answer in the best way we can. So Gole Andrew, we've been talking a lot about data misuse, and we also know that data violations is also a key issue, especially in the region we all work in. We know Uganda has passed the Data Privacy Act, and in spite of this, there's still a lot of data violations that are being recorded on a daily basis. So given your work with Encrypt Uganda and also DigSec, which are basically channeled towards data security, who are the target groups of data violation in the region, and what type of data is majorly at risk to surveillance by state actors, violations, and hacking?
Thank you very much, Toby, for that question. Talking about data breaches and which organizations are likely to face some of these breaches, we need to understand which group of organizations we are dealing with. In Uganda, we have organizations which they aim at holding the government accountable. And then we have other organizations which work and they are aimed at building the capacity of maybe the people or the community that they serve to overcome the challenges that they're facing. Now, some of these organizations have specific challenges that they face related to state actors and even non-state actors. If you have been following news in Uganda, we have had in recent months, we have had issues of office break-ins and data theft. Now, if you try to investigate that, you find that most of the data which is taken by these perpetrators is related to the activities of the organization. So for instance, we have organizations that work on good governance, and when they get office break-ins and the data is taken, that clearly tells you that the information which they were targeting, either it is reports, maybe trying to expose human rights violations. Sometimes you may find it is data which is relating to key witnesses who have provided confidential information. If you dig deeper into some of these office break-ins, you clearly can tell that the perpetrators are state actors. But then again, we have other non-state actors who either try to sabotage the work of the organizations based on the work that they do. For example, in Western Uganda, in Fotopoto, we've been there before. We've met organizations there before, and they were being persecuted by non-state actors. But oftentimes, these individuals are under the protection of state actors. So you find maybe some of them, they are called investors, and they're trying maybe to degrade the environment. If organizations are trying to see the activities of these companies and so-called investors, then you find they have the power to actually stop such organizations. We have information like upcoming projects. Most times the perpetrators are targeting at who are funding these kind of projects, okay? And then in most cases, they are trying to stop the flow of funding. We have actually seen, I think it was 2018 or 2019, a number of organizations had their bank accounts actually frozen. But then you ask yourself, how did they get to know that, oh, this organization is receiving maybe financial support for such a project? You realize that they are always spying on these organizations. So all activities that these organizations implement that are aimed at putting the government or the activities of certain individuals in check, they are always eavesdropping on such communications because they want to know what are they up to. You understand it? Then if you're talking about individuals, most times it's not even state actors. Most times it is non-state actors. We have people who lose their devices and then it falls in the wrong hands. Finding maybe the device has no passwords and inside their intimate photos, they often use such information maybe to blackmail individuals. If you don't send money or if you don't pay, we are going to release such information. And we have clearly witnessed this in Uganda. A number of people have had their intimate photos exposed online. And then you ask yourself, are these state actors? Obviously not. These are just non-state actors, and sometimes in most cases, they are individuals who are either aiming at getting financial, maybe they aim at getting financial income from individuals, or sometimes you even find just people who are not even for the money, or it is jealous ex and stuff like that. So you realize that in Uganda, we have always had these issues. Now, most times we don't have like nationwide publicity when such things happen. Sometimes the communication stays within the human rights community or maybe the individuals who are affected. And only you get to know about these things if the individuals or the organizations are high profile. But every day, different organizations face such issues which never get national coverage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gole, for letting us know what's going on the Uganda scene, and also like knowing the different types of data violations that exist over there. And I'm sure we all have our experiences, or maybe we do not. So we're going to have a poll come up now. And I'll hand over to Nathalie, who would lead us through the discussion on that.
Yeah, we are curious whether you or your organization has ever experienced a data breach. This could be in the form of hacking and the actual kind of hard tech breaches, but also in the sense of how your data might have been misrepresented by state or non-state actors. We're very curious to hear how you've experienced this. And to hear your experiences, because this session is really about empathizing with the problem. So we're trying to empathize also with your experiences. I'm seeing at least one person who's experienced this several times and even all the time. Very curious about who that is, once or twice. And some people have never experienced it. That's, I guess, a really good sign. The person who said, who answered, it happens all the time, who in this group answered that? And maybe that person could unmute themselves to share. Is there anyone who answered, it happens all the time, security breaches, data breaches? And if so, because someone answered that in the poll, so I'm very curious who that is and if you want to share your experience. There's also someone who wrote several times, less than 10 times, but still several times. Maybe that person can share. Feel free to unmute your mic, maybe turn on your video if you have the right connection and setting for that, and share with us. Oh, okay, I'm just seeing that Natalie said all the times, but she doesn't have a microphone. Natalie, maybe you can type out in the chat what your experience was, or maybe where you work as well, and in which context it happened. Would be great for us to learn from your experience. There was also someone who answered several times. Maybe that person has a working microphone and is willing to share in this session their experience. All right, it seems like we have a bit of a shy group. What about once or twice? Maybe anyone who experienced this once or twice is willing to share what their experience was, even if it just happened once. Of course, it's a little bit of a sensitive topic, so indeed, maybe if you prefer to stay anonymous, you can also message the Knowledge Platform, Melissa, so she could maybe share it anonymously, your experiences.
So hi, my name is Huma.
Hi, Huma.
Hi, I'm from Pakistan. It didn't happen to me as such in terms of at an organizational level, but what happened was, and I have trouble remembering it, but it was something to do with, you know, having my email ID somewhere, and then, you know, it happened quite some time ago. So I apologize for being kind of vague about it, but but I remember it happened, and I remembered receiving an email where it said that it was an accident that happened, and some of the data may be compromised, was the exact word that was used for it. And at that time, we did not realize what a compromised data meant. Especially if you're from a country like us, we don't really care for our data, as a nation, at least until recently. What could happen if a person has access to, let's say, my name and where I'm working, or my date of birth, and what is it? It is only recently that we started realizing it, that it is also a property of yours that that you possess, and you should be possessive about, and you should take care of it, and you should be conscious of it. So this comes from a very, you could say, unconscious collective response. People don't really realize here the importance of data and how you're supposed to be protective of it. I just wanted to say that when it did happen, it didn't feel out of place, because we did not realize that it was a problem.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. So that at that point, it didn't really have any consequences for you or your organization.
Yes, and now that I think about it, now I understand that, oh, okay, so this could have just been something much bigger than what I thought it to be.
Yeah. Great. Thank you for sharing that, Uma. And I can imagine that in different contexts, this is, dealt with differently. But I think the point also of the session was to share these kind of experiences and to really kind of realize how naive maybe many of us and many countries still are in how important data is, and the breach of, and how serious the consequences could potentially be. I've received a few anonymous messages. For instance,
excuse me.
Sorry, Samira, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to share a case that had happened with one of my colleagues in a previous organization. He used to work in the conflict zone. The area was known as Waziristan, in one of the province of Pakistan, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. It was those days when there were a lot of terrorists they were attacking non-government organizations and terming them as bad people. Our colleague, few of our colleagues used to travel in public transport, and they were attacked by these terrorists, and their phone was snatched. What they did is that they started looking at all the names which had abbreviations and which had the organization names like non-local names. So they were caught and they were taken away with them. And they had actually killed 2 of them, and the rest had, they had taken money and left them. So actually, this is one of the cases where your data can be checked in, and you can be in trouble because of that. I don't know how it relates with here, but it's really important to actually look into this matter as well. That how can this be minimized, or it can be finished from this sort of things.
Yeah, I agree, and it sounds like a terrible case, and also, I guess, a good example of how the consequences can be extremely severe. would you say that, yeah, there's a way in which there's maybe more awareness now of such kind of problems in Kyrgyzstan, I think it was that you said?
Yes.
Is the awareness starting to grow now for these kind of incidences?
Actually, the army has intervened and a lot of things have changed right now. But this is a case around about 8 years back.
Okay.
After that, after this, many incidences have happened, but things are getting better.
Okay. Okay.
But this is one of the cases I thought to share with you all.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I wanted to highlight also what was shared in the chat privately. One participant shared that it happens, data breaches happen all the time in Hong Kong. Many promotional organizations would call in having your personal mobile number, which may be accessible from your details being disclosed through another organization. So a lot of breaches through mobile phones also, like Samira just highlighted. And someone else asked the panel, the speakers, how important it has become over the years for organizations to develop large data protection projects for their projects. So the question is, how important has it become by now for organizations to develop large data protection programs? I think I can start with answering on SEMA's behalf. So SEMA is a very small organization. We started in 2018, so we're only 2 years young. And we're very ambitious in the amount of data we collect from citizens. So we have over 80,000 citizens that give feedback to us. We have a lot of data, and we are at a stage where I think we are really very seriously looking at how we can protect this data better, because we've not really critically sat down to think, wow, this is quite risky for the organization, for the citizens we're listening to, even maybe for the public offices that we have this data. We are, even at the stage where when we want to scale up in new countries, in our case, we wanted to start a pilot in Rwanda. The Rwandese authorities felt that they wouldn't want to pilot with us because we already have a lot of data on Ugandan authorities, and becoming an organization that owns data from different countries is even internationally starting to become a risk, because you own sensitive data from different countries, and by the very means of having that data, you become a target and suspicious organization that has all this data. So we are in the stage where we have not yet protected ourselves or developed a large data protection program, but we really want to, and it's high on our agenda to start doing that. So that would be my answer. Maybe Aidan and Andrew can also respond to that question. Would you want me to repeat it?
Okay. Yeah, I think I had the question. Hi, Aidan here. I think for us, our data is, because it's publicly funded, it's actually in the public domain. So we actually we anonymize all of our data, the sources of the data, but then we publish it. It's on our website. You can download the actual raw data and you can do your analysis, driven a little bit by our desire to have other people also make use of this public good for their own analytical, educational, academic purposes, but as well for any advocacy or policy shaping purposes there. So our data itself, but we have tried very hard, and we had ourselves checked by HIVOS. So here's a free advice for you, Nathalie. Talk to HIVOS about their data specialists who can help you protect, your systems so that they're not hacked. So we had them look at us. They attacked our firewalls and found that they could not breach them. So right now I'm feeling comfortable that people cannot go into our systems and manipulate the data. But then when we collect the data, we've cleaned it up, we've done analysis, we actually post it to a place such as the Humanitarian Data Exchange, HDX, very good place to find data and also to post your humanitarian data. And then, of course, on our website, we've had our data also posted on the UNESCO data website about learning outcomes. So it's out in the public domain, and that in a funny sort of way, you know what they say sometimes, the best place to hide something is in plain sight, you know? So put it out there, and it's in a funny way, it's gonna be protected. People will think there's nothing sensitive here, so I'm not gonna go and, you know, look for it. So sometimes making the data public can actually be a good way to protect it.
Gole, do you have anything to add to that?
Thank you very much, Natalie. I think over the recent years, data has become something which is very important. Like whether you are in the NGO sector, whether you are in the public sector, data is something that we all hold dear. So day by day, many organizations and companies have invested extremely a lot of money in trying to protect the data. For example, in the Ugandan context, if you look at the data protection and privacy law, it actually applies to anyone who collects, processes, and stores personal data. So whether it is an organization, whether it is a company, you are actually liable for anything that happens to personal data which you collect. So most organizations and companies have actually invested a lot of money to ensure that the data that they collect is secure. And even the data that they make public, they have to make sure that it does not have any personally identifiable information. So yes, over the recent years, data protection has been something that everyone is gearing to. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nathalie, are we done with this round? Are there more private messages you're like, okay, it's perfect, okay. So we've covered a lot of topics, and I think this is a good time to take questions from the audience. So if you have a question, you can signify by raising your hand and unmute yourself and do that, or put your question in the chat function. Do we have any questions, or I will wait for a few seconds before we proceed? Okay, if there are no questions, then we have another poll question to facilitate the discussion and dive deeper into the topic of digital security. So a poll will come up now, which is basically to know the digital security tools you use to protect yourself, protect your data on a daily basis. You can also talk, reply on behalf of your organization. So interesting, I think everyone is familiar with data tools for now, okay? Okay, there's some people who really do not understand what data security tools are. Okay, and someone uses several tools. Okay, at this point, no one has ticked the option of not using any security measure tools. So we have most people who use one or two and several, and a few would need further explanation on digital security tools. So before I proceed, I think it would be good if we hand it over to our digital security expert to maybe take us through what digital security tools are and the type of tools that exist. And we can talk about the tools we use, and we also want to hear from the audience and know what tools you currently use. So Gole, Andrew, would you like to shed more light on digital security tools?
Yeah, thank you very much, Toby, for that. But I think when we often talk about digital security, it is okay for someone to say they have never heard of it or they have never used any of the tools. Some of these tools, we use them actually every day, but we just don't know that the tools we are using are aimed at protecting our data. So when we talk about digital security, we are talking about those protective measures that we put in place to protect our data. And it doesn't have to be only sensitive data. each and every day that we communicate with loved ones, we communicate with colleagues at work, we communicate with our friends maybe in the diaspora or abroad, we use a lot of tools. We have social media platforms that we actually use almost daily. Each and every one, I'm sure, uses a social media platform. But then you find how you communicate on these platforms might not be secure. You find some of these platforms are not secure, or in other words, you are at risk of a data breach. So from a digital security point of view, we have a number of tools that we always recommend to people to use, because these tools have been audited and they have been approved for use in communicating sensitive information, or if you want to communicate something which is private. We have tools like Signal that we use to communicate. But then again, we have tools like WhatsApp. Almost everyone uses WhatsApp. But then in terms of digital security, you find that WhatsApp leans the other side, is not so much on the digital security among the security tools. You find us recommending tools like Signal, because we know Signal is open source, Signal is non-profit, Signal is not aimed at selling personal data. Okay, so you find us recommending tools like Signal. Then when we talk about storing data, every time you have data on your laptop or on your phone, if you don't back up that data, the chances of it getting lost in a data breach or virus attack are very high. Then again, you find us recommending a number of platforms that you can use to securely store that data. So again, there you find all of us, almost, or most of us in this call right now, we use different data backup platforms. You find someone uses iCloud, others use platforms like Google Drive. Okay, so some of those platforms are made to ensure that if you back up your data and there is a data breach, that data you have backed up is secure. Then again, we have other methods of protecting our communication. If you use email, for example, for communicating, we all use the username and then the password. But then you find there are other steps that you can put in place to ensure that that communication is secure, or that communication is private, or that email account is secure. So we have things like two-step verification that we always recommend as digital security trainers to use. So even if your password falls into the wrong hands, someone cannot get access to your account, because there is a second layer of protection in addition to the password. So again, you find platforms which don't have such mechanism in place, we tend not to recommend them. But then, because it is essential, many platforms now actually have adopted things like two-step verification, things like email encryption, and they are very many, but most of these, we use them daily, sometimes without even knowing that, what I'm using is a digital security method to protect maybe my communication or data. And there are many others. I could give examples and go on and on. Things like using password managers. So if you have 100 passwords, you are not compelled to use the same password for 100 platforms. You use different passwords for every social media platform or every online platform that you use, because you are going to back them up in password managers, no matter how hard they are. Really, you just have to back them all up and remember one password, which is called a master password. All these mechanisms are digital security methods of protecting data. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. And maybe just to add on that, we'd like to hear from like 2 or 3 people and know what tools you use to keep yourself safe online. Like personally, I was not that knowledgeable on the topic, but I got a lot of digital security training, and now I use a lot of two-factor authentication, as Andrew pointed out, encryption of adwares. For the 2FA, I use adwares, and that's like the most secure way to do your two-factor authentication. VPNs are also very useful, using open source platforms like GT, open source platforms for chatting. So, and also strong passwords, like that's also a very good tool to keep yourself safe and your data safe on the internet. So we'd like to hear from people as we round up to know what you do, the tools and the best practices you employ to keep yourself safe online. And maybe our other panelists can also share their experiences. A few people said they use several tools. Would you like to tell us the tools you use, especially if we've not mentioned any of the tools, so we can all learn with regards to this? Does anyone want to share the tools they use? You could also maybe like just go over the tools we've used, but we also want to know where people are at and how we use those tools. You can raise your hand or send a private message to the knowledge platform if you'd rather do that. While we wait for people to speak, maybe Natalie or Aidan, would you like to share any tool you use personally or in your organizations to keep yourself safe and to protect the data you collect?
Yeah, I'm definitely not a security expert, but I have been forced by my CTO and other people in my team to use a password generator. And it's actually quite convenient to do that. And as Andrew already shared, yeah, you have all your passwords in a secured format, and it generates very complex passwords because passwords are very easy to guess and to generate by hackers. So that's one of the tools I use. Yeah, and it hopefully helps us protect all my communication channels.
Thank you, Natalie.
I'm still trying to learn how to use a password generator. It's coaching, but we do the two-factor authentication that Gole Andrew was mentioning. And third, for office purposes, my office phone is connected to our IT people. So if by some chance I disappear, they can wipe it. So that what happened with Samira and her friends there in terms of your phone contacts being open to the state security apparatus becomes reduced because they can just wipe it, and the data that could be in state's eyes incriminating is not available to them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Aidan. And it's good to know that it's quite a diverse group and we're all learning in a way. It's a continuous journey to learn how to keep yourself safe online. Uma shared some other interesting perspectives using antivirus. That was an oversight, but it is very important to keep yourself safe and also for the safety of your hardwares. And also there are a lot of other things like blob suits to protect your network. So there are a lot of interesting tools out there. Are there any other tools we'd like to discuss? Gole Andrew also put a link on how to secure our passwords. Uma also said she secures her phone using biometrics, which is also very important, and using your fingerprint. But it also, I think, the last digital security training I had also told us about the downside to using biometrics, especially when you travel. It's easy for state actors to just like swipe your hands or your face and they have access to your phone. So while using biometrics, we also need to consider the security implications, especially when you're in transit. If you have sensitive data, if you want to keep your biometrics on, then it's good to like maybe put all your information on the cloud, keep it safe there, and delete the information from your phone. But we need to be quite careful while we use that. Okay. Bren said you would like to like the tools used that encrypt Uganda. They use email encryption, LastPass. I also use LastPass personally, and VPN. So we've covered quite a lot in terms of tools. Are there any other ideas we'd like to share at this point? Okay, basically, I think in terms of digital security tools, there's not one particular tool everyone should use, but it's just about knowing the type of data you deal with. I think there are best practices for all in terms of using strong passwords, If you're using a public Wi-Fi or a network you do not trust, it's good to use a VPN to be sure that you use good antivirus. But basically looking at what you're doing and knowing what tool is applicable to you at each given point in time. And it's also good to know that a lot of people do not have good understanding of this. We were all there at some point, and I think that's where you need to deliberately seek knowledge. If you have an organization and you deal with a lot of data, then maybe it's time for you to start thinking of getting a data security or digital security consultant who will walk you through the digital tools that are applicable and relevant to keep your work safe. Okay, at this point, we'll wrap up this Q&A and then go back quickly to our panelists for a very last round of questions, very brief, in like a minute or two. And I will start with Aidan. Aidan, quickly, would you like to tell us the international Aidan, so will you tell us how to avoid misinterpretation of our data by governments in different countries? I know you've worked a lot in South Africa, in East African countries and Nigeria, and a lot of people can see a lot of similarities with their countries and this country because it's most likely the political scene is alike. So please tell us how we can avoid misrepresentation of the data we produce.
I think the thing to know is that it is not possible to completely avoid misrepresentation. People will interpret the numbers or the data to best suit the narrative that they want to share with the world. But I think there's a couple of things that could be useful, especially for civil society to consider doing. I think one is, as an organization, as Andrew was talking about there, you can be targeted by governments who do not like the inconvenient data that you're publishing. So make sure as an organization, you are sort of compliant with the law so they don't have an excuse to come and raid you and stop you and deregister you. So that's one. That's at an institutional level. I think the two more is, I'm just going to stress what I said earlier. One is publish your methods, publish how you collected the data and how you've analyzed the data so that people can see that you are not doing funny business and that you are adhering to globally accepted statistical or data collection methods, right? So then they can't attack you on bias and this kind of thing. And of course, if you are able to then share how you have analyzed the data, including the pitfalls, the caveats, the health warnings as to how confident you are about that data, then the better it is that you're transparent about how much strength you put in the statistics that you've shown. I know we can be tempted to hide our skeletons in the cupboard, but I think in terms of data itself, it's better to be upfront about how confident you are with the numbers you've collected and how you have interpreted what they mean and how you have concluded what that data said. And the third one is, I mentioned earlier, publish the actual raw data. After having removed all personally identifiable information, publish the data, so that people can, and invite people in, by the way, in machine readable forms, not in PDF, okay? In Excel, in other ways, so that people can take, download and play with it. And as they say in America, kick the tires on your data, and again, it just raises eventually the credibility of your work, your data, and it makes your conclusions, your insights increasingly more powerful because people can trust how you've collected data, what you've analyzed about it. You're upfront about how strongly you can feel about the conclusions you have made. And I think that will help. And in that way, then you have armored yourself, you have put on the armor of credibility against the government, which would want for political reasons or other reasons to discredit or to misinterpret or misuse the data that you put out there.
Thank you, Aidan. And I'll move quickly to you, Nathalie. So what are your final words to us, especially with regards to we as citizens demanding accountability for the use of our data?
Thanks, Toby. I think, yeah, I really appreciated also Aidan's and Gole Andrew's contributions. I personally also felt that, yeah, I totally agree with what Aidan shared earlier. Like, we have to create an open space for debate about the data, and there needs to be discussions where we can interpret the data together and talk about it. And that's the only way in which you can kind of build this relationship of trust with the government from both sides. So we need to be able to show our data to them and discuss it with them. And at the same time, the government needs to be open-minded and willing to take feedback and discuss how they present it. So I think that's really important. And generally speaking, I would say, as a citizen, just reading any reports or online news articles, try to stay critical. I think it's very important to verify for yourself what are the sources of different statements that are being presented by government, by non-government actors, because we are confronted with a huge amount of fake information on a daily basis, and it manipulates us a lot. And I think it's extremely important that we as citizens, as individuals, try to keep critical of what we're seeing, what we're reading, and ask ourselves, is this real? Because in some cases these days with deepfake technology, it's very difficult to even know what is real, because it looks very real, whatever we see, even in video images. So let's try to be as critical as we can of what we see and continuously ask ourselves, is the information we're seeing truly correct, and how we can verify it and talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. So to round up, I will go to you, Gole Andrew. In 2 minutes, tell us how to keep this conversation going, and also to create more awareness and data protection, especially to people who feel like they're not endangered because they don't use the internet, but they use mobile phones, they use USSD functions. So very briefly, tell us how to create more awareness in this.
Yes, thank you very much, Toby, for that. I think I have 2 important points to pass across. One, it is very important to know that the people who still use the USSD and other unorthodox methods are people who largely are from rural areas. Maybe their level of awareness is not the same as the other people who use maybe smartphones. But then also, if you look through the Data Protection and Privacy Act of 2019, it applies to anyone who collects, processes, and stores data, whether it is for someone who's using USSD platform or someone who's using the other platform. So that act binds all these groups of people or data collectors. So the only thing we have to now to think about is these people who lack the knowledge or who feel, we may have nothing to hide. I mean, I'm not a target. I am not critical of the government. We need to look for all the available methods to ensure that we sensitize such groups of people, because right now we are at the data age where data is everything. Actually, we often say data is the new gold, or it's more valuable than gold. So each and everything that you communicate online can be weaponized against you or against someone else, or it can be used to manipulate maybe a particular discussion online, or it can be used by companies like Google or Yahoo or other companies to actually make money. So whatever you put out online, it is now important for you to note that much as you're not critical of the government, but that information, if you carelessly communicate it, it can be used, and at the end of the day, it can affect someone's life. Most people always say, I receive a lot of ads. I mean, I didn't subscribe for these things. But then again, it's those very people who forget that what they do online, they are the ones who willingly give some of these platforms consent to actually share the data and use the data in whatever way that they wish. So it is very important to look for all the available methods to sensitize these groups of people. And actually, I have actually a small phone which uses USSD, and oftentimes I receive messages from telecom companies providing advice. During this coronavirus crisis, we have been having a lot of mobile money theft and people losing money through that platform. So most of these companies actually send messages on after reading every message, at the end of it, you find, please do not share your PIN or do not share your password with other people, keep it private. So most of these companies now know that they are liable in the event of loss of data as a result of maybe their recklessness with how they handle the data. They are liable. Many of them actually are trying to look for all the available avenues to sensitize their users, whether they're using USSD platforms or not. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gole and Group. So now as we wrap up, I would just like to reemphasize that the impact of all we've discussed today is dependent on the actions we take as individuals and in our respective organizations. So the key takeaways from this session is that we have to be more deliberate in protecting our data. We need to demand accountability, create a discourse, as our panelists have emphasized all through the session, and also to go a step further by creating awareness within our organization and within our communities. And that's how we can see the result and the impact of all we've discussed today. So at this point, I'd like to say thank you to our panelists for the engaging discussions, and to all participants for your questions and for your interaction, and also for joining in the session today. As we're rounding up now, we'd like to further connect with everyone and explore the possibility of creating a community, or maybe going further with this discussion. And right now, we, the panelists, will drop our respective ways of our contact details, of ways with which you can reach us in the chat function. Please feel free to also drop yours, maybe your Twitter handle or your LinkedIn, how we can reach you, or you can just send us private emails if you'd rather not share that information here. Okay, so we'll do that now, and maybe we can all maybe take like 30 seconds to drop how we would like to connect. So I've done that for the Digital Human Rights Lab. I see Aidan has put his Twitter handle, and we can just do that. And yes, and would love to continue this conversation as it proceeds, because I think it's quite evolving and there are new things to learn every day. So finally, again, I would say thank you to everyone. And as we close the session, we'd like to capture a beautiful moment. So the panelists will wave, and please, if you can, it would be good if you turn on your cameras and then wave back to us, and then we'll capture it. And this will also be used for the conference records for this session. So as we say thank you again, we're going to say goodbye. And on the count of 5, please, if you can turn on your cameras, do that, and let's wave and say goodbye. And we can all unmute ourselves to say goodbye now. Okay, so I'll give everyone like a few seconds to mute or turn on the cameras. Okay, we have more people. More people. Okay, so on the count of 5, we can all say goodbye and wave and smile, like the biggest smile. It's been an amazing session. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone. Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
See you. Kamatse.